The judge's gavel hadn't even fallen when the bailiff stepped forward and told him to empty his pockets. People gasped. Someone whispered, "That's not right." The old man at the defense table didn't argue. He just looked down at his hands, veins raised like blue cords, and slowly set his wedding ring beside a folded piece of paper. The sound of metal on wood echoed through the courtroom, sharp and final, like a door being locked. Outside, rain streaked the tall windows of the county courthouse in Dayton, Ohio, blurring the American flag until its stripes looked like they were bleeding into one another. Inside, the air was stale with old paper disinfectant and impatience. This was housing court. No juries, no speeches, just outcomes. The clerk cleared her throat. Case number 1074, Midwest Property Holdings versus Samuel Carter. Samuel Carter was 71 years old. He wore a faded brown jacket that smelled faintly of engine oil and winter coats. His posture was straight but tired, the kind of tired that settles in the bones after a lifetime of showing up when you're supposed to. Across the aisle sat the plaintiff's counsel, a young man with perfect hair and a charcoal suit that still held its department store crease. He kept checking his watch, tapping the glass with a pen, as if time itself were inconveniencing him. Behind him, two representatives from Midwest Property Holdings whispered and smirked, their leather portfolios stacked neatly, their eyes already scanning the exit. They knew how this went. Judge Ellen Markham adjusted her glasses and scanned the file. Her voice was efficient. "Mr. Carter, according to the record, you are 6 months behind on rent." "Is that correct?" Samuel lifted his head. His voice was steady, low. "I fell behind when my wife got sick. I've been paying every month since. I brought the receipts." He slid a manila envelope forward. The clerk hesitated, then took it. The attorney stood. "Your Honor, partial payments do not negate breach. The lease is clear. We're requesting immediate possession. Immediate possession." The words landed heavy. A woman in the back row covered her mouth. Someone else shook their head slowly, like they'd seen this movie too many times. Samuel's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. He didn't look at the lawyer. He looked at the judge. "Ma'am, I've lived in that building for 22 years. I fixed the boilers myself when they broke. I kept the hall lights on when the landlord stopped answering calls. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for time." Judge Markham's expression didn't change. She glanced at the clock. The docket was full. Always full. "Mr. Carter, the law is the law." The gavel came down. Eviction granted. That was when the bailiff moved. "Sir," the bailiff said already, stepping closer, "I need you to comply." Samuel blinked, surprised. "Comply with what?" The bailiff nodded toward the table. "Personal effects. The ring. The phone." "I'm not under arrest," Samuel said quietly. "Standard procedure," the bailiff replied, voice firm, practiced. "Court order." Something shifted in the room. The lawyer smiled thinly, satisfied. One of the property reps leaned back, crossing his arms. Samuel removed his phone next. The screen lit up briefly. A missed call, then another. He turned it face down. The ring came last. His wife's ring. The one she'd worn through 48 years of marriage, 2 wars, 3 layoffs, and a cancer diagnosis that had eaten through their savings faster than any landlord ever could. The bailiff reached for it. Wait. The voice didn't come from Samuel. It came from the back of the courtroom. Heads turned. A man stood near the last row, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark wool coat that had seen better winters. His hair was grey at the temples, his face lined but composed. Not angry. Controlled. His eyes were fixed on the bench, unblinking. "Who are you?" the bailiff snapped. The man took one step forward. His shoes made a soft sound on the tile. "I'm someone who has a problem with what I'm seeing." The judge frowned. "Sir, this is a closed proceeding. Sit down, or I will have you removed." The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. "Your Honor, with respect, the court record you're relying on is incomplete." The lawyer scoffed. "And you are?" The man looked at him then. Really looked at him. The kind of look that made people straighten their backs without knowing why. "My name is David Brooks." No one reacted. It was a common name. Nothing about it rang bells. David continued. The plaintiff failed to disclose a payment, escrow, established under Ohio Revised Code, Section 532(1.07, filed within the statutory window. The courtroom went quiet. The clerk's fingers paused over the keyboard. Judge Markham leaned forward. "Sir, are you an attorney?" "No, ma'am." "Then you're out of order." David nodded once. "I understand. But the escrow exists, and the court accepted it." The young attorney laughed softly. "This is ridiculous, Your Honor. This is a delay tactic." David turned slightly, addressing the judge again. "I'm not asking for a delay. I'm asking you to check the docket entry from 4 months ago, the one filed at 9:16 in the morning." "It's there." The judge hesitated. "Just a beat too long." "Clerk," she said. "Pull it up." The clerk typed. Her brow furrowed. She scrolled, then stopped. Yes, Your Honor." "There is an escrow filing. It appears the funds were held pending inspection reports." The room stirred. Whispers rippled like a low wind. The lawyer's smile vanished. "That's irrelevant. The escrow was never funded." David's voice cut through the noise. "It was funded in full. The delay was caused by the landlord's failure to complete mandatory repairs." He turned finally toward Samuel. Samuel was staring at him now, confused, cautious. "Carter," David said softer. "Do you remember the inspector who came out last winter? The one who asked about the mold behind the radiators?" Samuel nodded slowly. "Yeah. Tall guy. Smelled like peppermint. He filed his report. Twice." Judge Markham sat back. The gavel rested idle in her hand. The bailiff looked uncertain now, hand hovering over the ring. The property reps leaned forward, whispering urgently. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, even if that were true, which it isn't, this man has no standing." David didn't look at him. Standing comes from facts. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. Not flashy, not dramatic. He placed it on the clerk's desk, slid it forward. "May I judge?" Markham nodded slowly. The clerk read. Her eyes widened just a fraction before she masked it. She passed it up. The judge read in silence. The room held its breath. Outside, thunder rolled low and distant. Judge Markham looked up, her gaze fixed on David Brooks. Something unreadable passed over her face. "Mr. Brooks," she said carefully, "you should have been listed as an interested party." David inclined his head. "That's on me." The lawyer stood abruptly. "Your Honor, I object to this entire—" "Sit down," Judge Markham said sharp. The gavel came down again. "Once. Clean." "Eviction is stayed," she said. "Pending review." The bailiff stepped back. Samuel's ring stayed on the table. David let out a slow breath he'd been holding for months. Around them, people whispered, stunned. No one noticed the missed calls lighting up David's phone again, or the message preview that read, "Board vote confirmed." "Proceed." "Not yet." This was only the beginning. The hallway outside courtroom 3 smelled like old coffee and damp wool coats, and nobody spoke as Samuel Carter stepped into it. His hands were still shaking, not the obvious kind, the deep tremor that lives under the skin when adrenaline drains and leaves the truth behind. He stood near a bench bolted to the wall, staring at the scuffed linoleum, like it might explain what had just happened. David Brooks walked a few steps behind him, measured, unhurried. He paused when he saw Samuel rub his thumb over the empty place on his finger. "You can put it back on," David said quietly. Samuel looked up. "What the ring?" David said, nodding toward the bailiff's desk behind the glass. "They won't touch it now." Samuel hesitated, then walked back. The bailiff avoided his eyes this time, sliding the ring across without a word. When Samuel slipped it on his breath, hitched. He closed his eyes for half a second, just long enough to steady himself. When he turned back, David was waiting. "I don't understand," Samuel said. "I don't know you." David nodded. "That's fair." A door down the hall opened. The young attorney from Midwest Property Holdings burst out, phone already at his ear. His face was flushed, his jaw tight. He shot a look at David that was pure venom. "This isn't over," the lawyer snapped, covering the receiver. "You have no idea who you're messing with." David didn't react. He watched the man walk away, voice rising as he spoke into the phone. "Yes, sir. I'm aware." "No, sir." She shouldn't have looked that far back. "We'll appeal." Samuel swallowed. Was he talking about you? David shrugged slightly. "Not yet. He's talking about losing control." They moved toward the exit. Outside, the rain had slowed to a thin, persistent drizzle that clung to coats and hair. The courthouse steps were slick. David held the door without comment as Samuel stepped through. Cars passed. A bus hissed as it pulled to the curb. Life kept moving. Samuel stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Why did you do that?" he asked. David stood beside him now, close enough that Samuel could smell clean soap and cold air. "Because it was wrong." Samuel gave a short, humorless laugh. "People don't usually step in for wrong anymore." David looked out at the street. Some still do. They just don't announce it. Silence stretched. Samuel shifted his weight. "You knew things. About the building. About the escrow." David nodded. "I made sure I did." Samuel studied him more closely now. The coat wasn't cheap, not flashy, but well made. The shoes were scuffed, but good leather. The posture wasn't defensive, it was grounded, used to rooms where words mattered. "You're not just some guy," Samuel said. David met his eyes. "Neither are you." That landed heavier than Samuel expected. A black sedan idled across the street, hazard lights blinking once before going dark. David glanced at it, then back at Samuel. "Do you have somewhere warm to go?" "My apartment," Samuel said automatically, then hesitated. "If they don't change the locks." "They won't," David said. "Not today." Samuel nodded slowly. "Then yeah, I guess I do." David gestured toward the crosswalk. "Mind if I walk with you?" They crossed together. The sedan rolled forward, then stopped again a half-block away. David didn't look at it this time. They walked for a few minutes in silence, past a pawn shop with flickering lights, past a diner Samuel had eaten at since before his knees started hurting in the cold. "You ever think about leaving?" David asked. Samuel snorted softly. "Where would I go?" David waited. "My wife's buried here," Samuel said after a moment. "My friends are here. The walls in that apartment know my voice. That's not nothing." "No," David said. "It isn't." They stopped outside a brick building with a crooked fire escape. Samuel pulled his keys from his pocket, hands steadier now. He turned before unlocking the door. "You still haven't told me who you are." David considered him. "Today, I'm just someone who made a phone call a few years ago and realized the wrong people were being listened to." Samuel frowned. "That doesn't explain much." "It will," David said. "Eventually." Samuel studied him, then nodded once. "You want coffee?" David almost smiled. "I do." Inside the apartment smelled faintly of old books and lemon cleaner. A space lived in, not staged. Photos on the wall, a wedding portrait, a younger Samuel smiling without effort. David took it in quietly with respect. As Samuel filled the kettle, his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it, then pushed it aside. "You're popular," Samuel said, noticing. David shrugged out of his coat. "Timing has a way of catching up." The kettle whistled. Cups were set. Steam rose. They sat at a small table by the window. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Samuel wrapped his hands around the mug. "They'll come back," he said. "People like that. They don't like being told no." David's voice was calm. "I know." "You ready for that?" Samuel asked. David met his gaze. "I've been ready for a long time." The phone buzzed again. This time, David picked it up. He read the screen. His expression didn't change, but something in the room shifted. The air tightened. "Is it bad?" Samuel asked. David set the phone face down. "It's loud." Samuel nodded. "Loud usually means scared." David looked at him with new respect. "You've seen this before." Samuel leaned back. Different faces, same playbook. A pause. Then David spoke, choosing his words carefully. "They're going to try to paint you as a problem." Samuel laughed once. "At my age, let them try." "They'll dig," David said. "Missed payments, old permits. Anything to make today look like a mistake." Samuel's smile faded. And you? They'll dig deeper. Samuel watched him closely now. That doesn't worry you. It does, David said. But not for the reasons they think. Outside, the black sedan finally pulled away. David stood. I should go. Samuel rose too. Will I see you again? Yes, David said without hesitation. At court, David shook his head. Somewhere with more light. They shook hands. Samuel's grip was firm, steady. When David stepped back into the street, the sky was breaking open. A thin line of blue cut through the clouds. His phone buzzed again as he walked. He answered this time. Yes, he said. I'm aware the board is split. A pause. No, he continued. Do not issue a statement. Another pause. Because if we speak now, they control the narrative. He stopped at the corner, watching traffic move like a current. Let them make the first mistake, David said. They always do. He ended the call, slipped the phone into his pocket, and kept walking. Behind him, in a small apartment with old walls and a warm kitchen, Samuel Carter sat at his table, staring at his ring, as if seeing it for the first time. For the first time in months, he wasn't afraid of the knock on the door. And somewhere across the city, men in glass offices were realizing a quiet hearing in a forgotten courtroom had just become a problem they could not outrun. By the next morning, Midwest Property Holdings had rewritten the story. The headline hit before sunrise. Local landlord thwarted by technicality. Beneath it, a grainy courthouse photo caught Samuel Carter, mid-step, mouth-open eyes, unfocused, as if confusion were guilt. The article talked about unpaid rent, selective enforcement, and a mysterious interruption by an unnamed third party who may have misled the court. Samuel read it twice, then folded the paper carefully and set it beside the sink. The kettle hadn't even finished heating. His phone rang. Unknown number. He didn't answer. Across town, in a glass tower overlooking the river, the mood was sharp and brittle. A long conference table. Bottled water untouched. 3 men and 1 woman sat in silence, while the screen at the far end filled with numbers that were not moving the right way. This is a nuisance, said Howard, Leland Midwest's regional director, tapping his pen against the table. We handle 1,000 of these a month. The woman beside him. Marjorie Klein, head of legal, didn't look up from her tablet. Not like this, Howard scoffed. It's one tenant. It's timing, Marjorie said. And exposure. A younger man at the end of the table cleared his throat. We traced the escrow filing. It's clean. We should have disclosed it. Howard leaned back. We didn't have to. We do now, Marjorie said. Because someone wanted us to miss it. Howard smiled thinly. You think this is intentional? Marjorie finally looked up. I think someone is watching how we behave when we think no one is. The door opened. An assistant stepped in, pale. Sir, there's a call for you. From Brooks. Howard's smile tightened. Which Brooks? David Brooks. The room went still. Marjorie's jaw set. Put him on speaker. Howard nodded. Do it. The line clicked. David's voice came through calm, unhurried. Good morning. Howard forced a chuckle. Mr. Brooks, to what do we owe the pleasure? David didn't answer right away. "I read your statement," he said. "It was efficient." Marjorie leaned forward. "You're interfering with an ongoing matter." David's voice remained even. "I'm correcting a pattern." Howard snorted. "You disrupted a lawful eviction. You attempted to bypass an escrow and intimidate an elderly tenant." David replied. "I interrupted that." Howard's face flushed. "Who do you think you are?" There it was, the question everyone eventually asked. David paused, long enough for the silence to stretch thin. "Someone who prefers to resolve things privately before they become public." Marjorie exchanged a look with Howard. "Is this a threat?" "No," David said. "It's a window." Howard leaned forward. "What do you want?" David didn't hesitate. "You'll withdraw the eviction. You'll repair the building to code. And you'll establish a hardship review for tenants over 65. Howard laughed out loud. "You can't be serious." "I am. And if we don't," David's tone didn't change, "then I'll file a formal complaint with the state. I'll submit inspection records you already have. And I'll make sure every local outlet understands how often your company chooses speed over safety." Marjorie closed her eyes briefly. "You don't have standing." David's reply was soft. "Check again." The line went dead. In Samuel's apartment, the knock came just after noon. 3 sharp raps. Official. He opened the door to a man in a pressed jacket holding a clipboard. Midwest logo. Smile rehearsed. "Mr. Carter," the man said, glancing past him into the apartment. "We're here to conduct an inspection." Samuel folded his arms. "You didn't call." The man shrugged. "Routine." Samuel stepped aside, letting him in. The inspector moved quickly, checking boxes, snapping photos. He paused at the radiator. "Still leaking," he said. Samuel nodded. "I've been calling about that for years." The man hesitated. "Just a fraction." "You know," he said quietly, "this wouldn't be happening if someone hadn't stirred things up." Samuel met his eyes. "It wouldn't be happening if you'd fixed it." The man looked away. By late afternoon, the story shifted again. A local station ran a follow-up. Housing court ruling under review. They interviewed a retired nurse from Samuel's building, a veteran on the 3rd floor, a mother who talked about mold and unanswered calls. Samuel watched from his kitchen table, hands wrapped around cold coffee. He hadn't planned to speak, but the truth was speaking anyway. His phone rang again. This time he answered. "Mr. Carter," a woman said. "This is Lisa Moreno from Channel 7. Would you be willing to comment?" Samuel swallowed. "I'm not good on camera." "You don't have to be," she said. "Just honest." He thought of David, of the way he'd stood without raising his voice, of the ring on his finger. "All right," Samuel said. "Come by tomorrow." That evening, David stood alone in his office lights, low city glowing beyond the glass. His phone buzzed. "Marjorie's name," he answered. "Yes, you're pushing them into a corner," she said. "They're not used to that. They'll adapt," David replied. "Or they'll break. And if they break," she said, "they'll blame you." David watched traffic far below, lines of red and white weaving through the dark. "They already do." A pause. You didn't tell them everything Marjorie said? No, David agreed. Why? Because it's not time. She sighed. You're betting a lot on public patience. I'm betting on decency, David said. It's slower. But it lasts. He ended the call. Across the city, Howard Leland stared at his screen, jaw clenched. The numbers had dipped again. Not much, enough to notice. Find out who Brooks is really working for, he snapped. The assistant nodded. We're trying. Howard slammed his fist on the table. Try harder. Night settled in. Samuel lay awake in bed, listening to the building breathe. Pipes ticking. Wind brushing brick. For the first time in months, he wasn't counting footsteps in the hall. He reached over and touched the ring again. Outside, somewhere in a city that had forgotten him, and was remembering again, the ground was shifting. Quietly. Relentlessly. And no one at Midwest Property Holdings slept well that night. The police cruiser idled outside the building just after dusk, lights off engine humming low, like it didn't want to be noticed. Samuel Carter watched it from behind the curtain, heart tightening despite himself. At his age you learn which sounds mean trouble. That engine was one of them. He didn't move until the knock came. Firm. Controlled. Not angry. When he opened the door, it wasn't Midwest Property. Holdings standing there. It was a uniformed officer and a woman in a navy coat holding a leather folder. Mr. Carter, the officer asked. Yes, Samuel said, keeping his voice even. I'm Officer Daniel Ruiz, the man said. This is Ms. Angela Park from the City Housing Department. We're here regarding a complaint. Samuel exhaled slowly. Come in. They stepped inside, eyes scanning the apartment. Not searching, observing. Angela Park glanced at the radiator, the peeling paint near the window frame, the small humidifier humming by the couch. You've been living here a long time, she said. 22 years, Samuel replied. Officer Ruiz nodded. We received a call alleging unauthorized alterations. Samuel laughed once sharp. Let me guess. The weather-stripping Angela met his eyes. And the heater valve. I fixed what they wouldn't, Samuel said. That valve froze my wife's hands last winter. Ruiz shifted his weight. He'd heard this story before. Different address, same ending. We're not here to write you up, he said. We're here to document conditions. Angela opened her folder. Midwest filed a complaint claiming tenant interference with property systems. They're positioning for cause. Samuel's jaw tightened. So this is retaliation. Angela didn't disagree. It looks like it. She stepped closer to the radiator, crouching. May I? Samuel nodded. She touched the pipe, winced at the heat, then photographed the rusted seam. This should have been replaced years ago. Ruiz scribbled notes. They ever send maintenance? Samuel shook his head. They sent letters. Angela straightened. Mr. Carter, I want to be clear. What they're doing now won't hold. Samuel studied her face. She wasn't young. Mid-40s, maybe. Lines around the eyes that came from choosing this job over something easier. Then why does it feel like I'm still one step from the curb? Samuel asked. Angela closed the folder. Because they're hoping you'll get tired. The cruiser pulled away an hour later. The apartment felt quieter than before. Samuel sat at the table, the interview light still warm in his memory. Lisa Moreno had been kind, patient. She'd let him talk about his wife, about the building, about how dignity erodes slowly like paint under steam. His phone buzzed, a text from David. They sent inspectors. Samuel typed back. They always do. A pause, then another message. You did well today. Samuel stared at the screen. No one had said that to him in a long time. Across town, in a downtown restaurant, with too much glass and not enough warmth, Howard Leland leaned forward, voice low. You're telling me the city is siding with him. Marjorie Klein sipped her water. I'm telling you the city doesn't like being embarrassed. Howard's lips thinned. Then we changed the subject. How? Marjorie asked. Howard smiled. We find Brooks's angle. Nobody does this for free. The man across from them, a consultant with sharp eyes and a tablet, cleared his throat. We ran Brooks through corporate registries. He's clean. No active filings. No visible ties. Howard scoffed. Nobody's clean. Actually, the consultant said, there's one thing. Marjorie looked up. Go on. He sits on the board of a non-profit, the consultant said. Quiet one. No press. Housing access. Senior advocacy. Howard laughed. A do-gooder, maybe the consultant said. But the donor list is interesting. Marjorie leaned in. How interesting. The consultant turned the tablet. Names scrolled past, some familiar, some not. Howard's smile faded. Meanwhile, David Brooks stood in a narrow office with the lights off, watching the city blink. His phone buzzed. He didn't answer immediately. He knew the number. When he did, the voice on the other end was tight. They're circling. I expected that, David said. They pulled donor records. They're asking questions. David closed his eyes briefly. Let them. This could get personal, the voice warned. David opened his eyes. It already is. A pause. You're sure about the timing? Yes, David said. They're about to make a mistake. The next morning, the mistake came, wrapped in an envelope. Samuel found it taped to his door. Red lettering. Notice of safety violation. He peeled it off with shaking hands, read it twice, then sat down hard in the kitchen chair. Condemnation review. Pending. They weren't evicting him. They were trying to empty the building. He called David. I just got a notice, Samuel said. Voice strained. David listened without interrupting. When Samuel finished, David spoke quietly. They escalated. They're saying the building isn't safe, Samuel said. They're saying I have to leave. David's voice sharpened just a notch. They can't do that without an inspection. They scheduled one, Samuel said. Tomorrow morning. Silence. Then David said, Good. Samuel blinked. Good. Yes, David said. That's exactly what we needed. By the time the inspectors arrived the next day, there were cameras across the street. Channel 7, a freelance photographer, a man with a tripod, who nodded at Samuel like they were co-conspirators. Angela Park stood at the front steps, clipboard in hand. Her expression was unreadable. Howard Leland arrived 10 minutes later, flanked by 2 attorneys and a man in a hard hat who hadn't looked at a boiler in his life. "This is unnecessary," Howard said loudly. "We're cooperating." Angela didn't look at him. "Then you won't mind transparency." The inspectors moved through the building. They photographed cracked wiring, documented mold, measured carbon monoxide levels that made one of them swear under his breath. Tenants gathered in the hallway. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into anger. Howard wiped sweat from his temple. "We'll address these issues." Angela looked up. "You had years. The cameras caught it all." That night, Midwest Property Holdings issued a statement about unexpected legacy issues and commitment to resident safety. David read it on his phone and smiled without humor. They were panicking now, and panic always left fingerprints. The call came at 4:30 in the morning, when the city was still holding its breath and only delivery trucks knew the streets. David Brooks was already awake. He'd been awake most of the night, sitting in the dark with a legal pad and a cup of coffee gone cold, listening to the building settle around him. When the phone lit up, he didn't flinch. "They're filing an emergency injunction," the voice said without preamble. "County level, ex parte." David closed his eyes. Against whom? Against the building? Against the city? Against you indirectly. David stood and walked to the window. The sky was just beginning to thin, the black easing into grey. "What's the judge?" "Retired landlord," the voice said. "Appointed back in the 80s. He knows Howard." David exhaled slowly. "They're moving fast. They're scared." "They should be," David said. "How soon?" "Hearing at 9. David nodded, though no one could see him. "File our response at 7:30. Include the inspection photos and flag the conflict." There was a pause. "You want to go public?" David watched a single light flick on across the street. Not yet. He ended the call and stood still for a moment, feeling the weight settle. This was the part no one saw. The quiet pressure. The point where you either blinked or leaned in. Across town, Samuel Carter slept through the first ring of his phone. When he answered the second, his voice was thick. "Mr. Carter," Angela Park said gently. "I wanted you to hear it from me. Midwest is trying to force a ruling." Samuel sat up, heart pounding. "On what grounds?" "Safety," she said. "They're claiming imminent danger." Samuel laughed, but it came out broken. "So now they care." Angela didn't laugh. "They want control back." "What do I do?" Samuel asked. "You stay put," Angela said, "and you let us handle it." After the call, Samuel sat at the edge of the bed, staring at his hands. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. He thought of the years he'd woken up here. The arguments, the laughter. The night his wife had come home from the hospital and sat right where he was sitting now, too tired to cry. He stood and made coffee. Strong, bitter, the way she liked it. By 8:30, the courthouse steps were crowded again. Fewer gawkers, more intent faces. Attorneys with briefcases, reporters pretending not to listen. Samuel stood off to the side, coat-buttoned ring heavy on his finger. David joined him without announcement, standing shoulder to shoulder like they'd done this before. They're trying to freeze the city, Samuel said quietly. They're trying to scare you, David replied. Same thing. Samuel looked at him. This is bigger than me now. David didn't deny it. It always was. Inside the courtroom felt different, less routine. The judge sat higher. The attorneys spoke faster. Midwest's counsel argued urgency, risk, responsibility. David listened, hands folded, eyes steady. When it was his turn, he didn't rush to the podium. He waited. Let the room settle. Your Honor, he said, this is not an emergency. This is a maneuver. The judge frowned. Mr. Brooks, you are not counsel of record. No, David said. I'm something else. A ripple of irritation moved through Midwest's table. David continued, voice calm. The conditions in that building did not change overnight. What changed was attention. He gestured toward the exhibits. My colleague from the city has documented these violations for years. Midwest chose not to act. They chose instead to weaponize safety when transparency became inconvenient. The judge leaned back. You're suggesting bad faith. I'm stating a pattern, David replied. Midwest's attorney stood. This is inflammatory. David turned slightly. So is neglect. The judge raised a hand. Silence fell. Mr. Brooks, the judge said, why are you involved? There it was again. The question. David met his gaze. Because I've watched this happen too many times. Quietly. Efficiently. Always to the same people. The judge studied him. You have an interest here. David nodded once. Yes. And what is it? David took a breath. Not for courage. For timing. I own the debt Midwest used to acquire that building, he said. Through a holding trust established after the last market correction. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. A reporter's pen froze mid-stroke. Midwest's counsel stiffened. That's irrelevant. It's relevant, David said evenly. Because it gives me standing. And because it means I've reviewed their books. The judge's eyes sharpened. You should have disclosed that. I did, David said. It was filed with the clerk last quarter. Buried under routine. Silence pressed in. The judge nodded slowly. I see. Midwest's attorney whispered urgently to Howard, who had gone pale. Motion denied, the judge said finally. Inspection stands. Eviction stays suspended. The gavel came down. Outside, the air felt lighter. Samuel exhaled a breath he'd been holding since dawn. David stepped aside as reporters surged forward. He didn't answer questions. He didn't smile. Howard Leland pushed past them, face-tight phone, already at his ear. We need options, he hissed. Now. That afternoon, the options narrowed. An internal memo leaked. Maintenance budgets slashed. Safety reports ignored. A quiet pattern of moving tenants out under the guise of renovations that never came. By evening, Midwest's stock dipped. Not much. Enough. David sat alone in his office again, reading the memo line by line. The phone rang. This is getting away from them, the voice said. Yes, David replied. Which means they'll do something stupid. They're talking about selling the building. David smiled thinly. They can't. Why? Because they don't own it the way they think they do. A pause. You're sure? I structured it myself, David said. Years ago. For moments like this. He ended the call and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Across town, Samuel stood by his window, watching the lights come on one by one. For the first time since the notice had appeared on his door, he allowed himself to imagine staying. Not just surviving. Staying. The phone buzzed. A message from David. You're safe tonight. Samuel typed back. Thank you. David watched the reply appear. He didn't answer right away. Somewhere between justice and consequence, the ground was still shifting, and the people who thought they owned it were about to learn how little control they had left. The first subpoena landed before noon, slid across a polished desk with a confidence that assumed obedience. Howard Leland stared at it, jaw-tight fingers drumming against the glass tabletop, as if rhythm could restore control. The consultant stood across from him, hands folded, eyes careful. This is civil, the consultant said. For now. Howard snorted. For now always means criminal later. Marjorie Klein entered without knocking, coat still on, rain dotting the shoulders. She dropped her tablet on the table. They're asking for internal communications, maintenance logs, vendor invoices. Going back 10 years, Howard looked up sharply. That's fishing. No, Marjorie said. That's dredging. The consultant shifted. There's chatter online. Tenant groups, advocacy orgs. They're coordinating. Howard pushed back from the table and stood. He walked to the window, looking down at the city like it owed him something. Find Brooks, he said. Not the version on paper. The real one. We've tried, the consultant replied. He's careful. Howard turned. Nobody is careful forever. Across town, in a neighborhood that didn't make the brochures. Samuel Carter stood in the hallway as movers carried boxes past him. Not his boxes. Mrs. Delaney's. 3rd floor. She'd lived there longer than he had. She leaned on her cane, watching a framed photo get wrapped in a paper. They say it's temporary, she whispered. Samuel nodded. They always do. A young man with a clipboard cleared his throat. Ms. Delaney, we'll store your items until remediation is complete. Where am I supposed to go? She asked. The man looked uncomfortable. We have vouchers. Samuel stepped forward. For how long? The man hesitated. It varies. Mrs. Delaney's hand shook. Samuel reached out and steadied it without thinking. I'll walk you to the cab, he said. Outside, the street was wet and grey. The cab driver watched through the mirror as Mrs. Delaney climbed in, face pinched with worry. You don't let them forget. You, Samuel said softly. She smiled thinly. They never knew me. The cab pulled away. Samuel stood there a moment longer, then turned back toward the building. The cameras were gone today. The pressure wasn't. His phone buzzed. A message from David. They're moving people to create urgency. Samuel typed back. I saw. A pause. Then another message. Stay visible. Samuel exhaled and slipped the phone into his pocket. Visible had never been his instinct, but he was learning. At City Hall, Angela Park sat across from a deputy commissioner with tired eyes and a coffee gone cold. Papers covered the desk. They're trying to empty the building without admitting fault, Angela said. It's displacement dressed as safety. The deputy rubbed his temples. They have lawyers. We have process. Process without spine is theatre, Angela said quietly. He looked at her. You're sticking your neck out. She met his gaze. So are the tenants. He sighed. What do you need? Angela slid a folder forward. Emergency relocation funds, independent inspectors, and a statement. A statement he repeated. That says the city will not allow safety to be used as a weapon, Angela said. He nodded slowly. Draft it. Across the river. David Brooks sat in a conference room with the lights dimmed and the blinds half drawn. A handful of people sat around the table. Not many. Chosen carefully. They're testing edges, one of them said, trying to provoke you. David listened, fingers steepled. They'll escalate. Financially, another voice added. They're exploring us asset transfers. David nodded. They'll try to outrun accountability. A woman at the end of the table leaned forward. Do we stop them now? David shook his head. We let them move. Movement creates records. A phone vibrated. David glanced at the screen, then set it face down. We hold. That evening a letter arrived at Samuel's door. Hand delivered. No logo, no threats, just paper and weight. He opened it at the table, reading slowly. An offer. Relocation assistance, a settlement if he agreed to vacate voluntarily. The language was soft, considerate. It smelled like money. He folded it and set it aside. The knock came later. 2 raps, familiar. Angela stood there, hair damp from rain, eyes intent. You got the letter? Samuel nodded. I did. She stepped in, closing the door behind her. They're trying to split you from the others. Samuel leaned against the counter. I won't take it. Angela studied him. I didn't think you would. They think this is about comfort, Samuel said. It's about being erased. Angela nodded. Tomorrow there's a meeting. Tenant council. Media may show. Samuel hesitated. I don't like microphones. I know, Angela said. But they like you. Samuel laughed softly. I'm not much to like. You are, she said. You just don't perform. The meeting filled the basement room with folding chairs and nervous energy. Faces lined with worry. Some angry, some tired. Samuel stood near the back until someone pulled him forward. Say something, a man whispered. They listen to you. Samuel swallowed and stepped to the front. The microphone felt heavy. I don't know much about law, he said, or business. But I know this building. I know what it sounds like when the pipes knock in winter. I know who checks on who when the power goes out. That's not an asset. That's a community. A murmur rippled. They want us quiet and scattered. Samuel continued. Because quiet is easy. But we're not asking for favors. We're asking for repairs and respect. Applause broke out, tentative at first, then stronger. Across the city, Howard Leland watched the clip on his phone, jaw clenched. He's becoming a symbol, he said. Marjorie didn't look up. You made him one. Howard's phone rang. He answered, voice clipped. Yes. The voice on the other end was calm. We need to talk about your exposure. Howard bristled. Who is this? Someone who reads balance sheets, the voice replied. And footnotes. Howard felt a chill. Say your name. A pause. Not yet. The call ended. Howard stared at the screen, then hurled the phone across the room. It shattered against the wall. Back in his office, David Brooks stood alone again. City lights stretching like a circuit board beyond the glass. He picked up his phone and finally answered the messages he'd ignored. One to Angela. Keep pushing. The city matters. One to his team. Prepare the package. One to Samuel. Tomorrow will be louder. Stay steady. He set the phone down and rested his palms on the desk. The pressure was building. He could feel it in the way doors closed a little faster, in the way voices sharpened when his name was mentioned. They were close now. Close enough to panic. Close enough to make the kind of mistake that turned a quiet campaign into a reckoning. Outside, the city hummed, unaware of the lines being drawn beneath its streets. And in a building that refused to empty quietly lights, stayed on longer than usual, a small, stubborn defiance against the dark. The hearing was scheduled for 10 in the morning, but by 8 the room was already full. Not full the way courtrooms usually filled with bored faces and crossed arms. This was different. People stood along the walls. Reporters whispered into phones. A low tension sat in the air, tight as a drawn wire. Midwest Property Holdings had asked for a consolidated ruling. One judge, one decision. End it. Samuel Carter sat in the second row, hands folded back straight. He wore the same brown jacket. He had polished his shoes. Not for them. For himself. Behind him, tenants murmured. A mother bounced a restless child on her knee. An older man stared at the ceiling like he was counting cracks. Angela Park sat 2 rows back, unreadable, a folder balanced on her lap. David Brooks had not arrived yet. That absence was noticed. Howard Leland stood at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 2 senior attorneys and Marjorie Klein. He looked composed, confident, the kind of confidence that came from believing momentum still belonged to him. "Where's Brooks?" one of the attorneys whispered. Howard didn't answer. He checked his watch. 8:57. The judge entered at 9 sharp. Judge Harold Whitman, 72 years old, former prosecutor, known for efficiency, known for impatience. "All right," Whitman said, settling in. "Let's proceed." Midwest's counsel rose immediately. "Your Honor, we're requesting consolidated relief on grounds of public safety. This building is uninhabitable. Continued occupancy presents an imminent risk." Whitman nodded. "I've read the filings," counsel pressed on. "We have affidavits, expert testimony, photographic evidence." He gestured. Screens lit up, cracked wiring, mold blooms, rusted pipes, murmurs rippled through the gallery. "This is not eviction, counsel," continued smoothly. "It's protection." Angela Park shifted in her seat. Whitman looked toward the defense table. Response. David Brooks still hadn't arrived. Angela stood. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "the city does not dispute the conditions. We dispute the intent." Whitman raised a brow. "Explain." "These conditions existed for years," Angela said. "Midwest documented them, deferred them. Only when scrutiny increased did they claim urgency." Howard leaned toward his counsel, whispering. Angela continued. "They are attempting to displace tenants under the guise of safety, to avoid liability." Whitman steepled his fingers. "And Mr. Brooks?" Angela met his gaze. "Mr. Brooks has filed supplemental materials. He is en route." Howard smiled faintly. Whitman sighed. We are not waiting. At that moment, the doors opened. Not dramatically. No flourish. Just a quiet hinge and a shift in air. David Brooks walked in. No coat this time, navy suit, open collar, no tie. He moved with purpose, not haste, eyes already on the bench. Behind him came two people the room didn't expect. A woman with silver hair and a leather briefcase. A man with a thick binder held like something heavy. Howard's smile vanished. David reached the defense table and set a single folder down. He didn't sit. Apologies, Your Honor, he said evenly. Traffic. Whitman studied him. You are late. Yes, David replied. But the record is about to catch up. A flicker of irritation crossed Whitman's face. Proceed. Briefly. David nodded. He turned just slightly so the room could see him. Not a performance, a positioning. Midwest Property Holdings is asking this court to believe their concern is sudden, he said. That safety woke them up last week. He opened the folder. It didn't. He slid a document forward. Then another. Then another. These are internal emails. David continued. Maintenance requests marked defer until vacancy. Budget memos instructing staff to delay remediation in targeted buildings. Language like accelerate natural turnover. Howard stood abruptly. Objection, relevance. Whitman held up a hand. Overruled. Continue. David didn't look at Howard. They are not protecting tenants. They are protecting margins. He gestured to the man beside him. This is Michael Henson, former Regional Facilities Manager for Midwest, employed for 14 years. A murmur ran through the room. Michael swallowed and stepped forward. His voice shook, but he spoke. We were told not to fix certain buildings, seniors, long-term tenants. The idea was they'd leave on their own. Howard's face flushed. This is hearsay. David turned. He has emails. Michael opened the binder. Pages fluttered. He handed one to the clerk, then another. Whitman leaned forward, eyes narrowing. David went on. And this is Ruth Alvarez, he said, nodding to the silver-haired woman. Former accountant for Midwest's holding company. Ruth didn't hesitate. They set aside a reserve for repairs. It was never used. Funds were diverted. Bonuses were paid instead. Silence pressed in. Howard's counsel whispered urgently. Marjorie stared straight ahead, jaw locked. Whitman looked at Howard. Is this accurate? Howard found his voice. This is a mischaracterization. These people are disgruntled. David finally turned fully toward him. They're documented. Howard snapped. Who are you to bring this? David's eyes didn't waver. Someone who reads footnotes. He took a breath. 3 years ago, Midwest restructured its debt. Quietly. Through a layered trust. That trust is now in default. Howard stiffened. David continued. The trigger clause was tied to regulatory action. City inspection findings qualify. Marjorie's eyes widened. Howard. Whitman sat back slowly. Mr. Brooks. Yes, David said. You own the note. I control it, David replied. A beat. Then another. Whitman exhaled. So this is leverage. No, David said. This is consequence. Howard exploded. This is extortion. David shook his head. This is accountability. Whitman raised his gavel. Enough. He looked out at the room, at the tenants, at the cameras, at the documents stacked like weight. This court will not grant Midwest's request, he said. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the state for review. The gavel came down. A sound like breath releasing filled the room. Samuel closed his eyes. Howard sank back into his chair, color draining from his face. Outside the hallway buzzed. Reporters surged. Voices overlapped. David stepped aside, letting Angela pass. She met his eyes. A single nod. Samuel approached slowly. You did this, David corrected him gently. You stood. Others followed. Samuel looked at him. They're not done. No. David agreed. They're exposed, as if summoned. Howard pushed through the crowd, face tight, voice low and venomous. You think you won? David met his gaze. I think you're finished. Howard leaned in. You don't know who you're dealing with. David's reply was quiet. I know exactly who you are. Howard stepped back, eyes burning. This isn't over. David watched him go. It never is, he said softly. That night, the clip of the hearing spread. Emails, testimony, a pattern too clear to ignore. Advocacy groups mobilized. Regulators took notice. In his apartment, Samuel sat at his table, the same ring, the same walls. But the air felt different, lighter, like something heavy had been lifted. He looked at his phone. A message from David. Tomorrow changes things. Samuel typed back. I'm ready. David stood alone in his office again. City lights blinking like signals. He loosened his collar and leaned back, letting the weight settle. They had crossed a line today. Not loudly, not violently, but completely. And once crossed, there was no going back. The first arrest happened quietly before most people had finished their morning coffee. Howard Leland was halfway through a conference call when the knock came. Not loud, not aggressive, just precise. 3 measured taps that carried authority without noise. He froze mid-sentence, hand hovering over the mute button. Howard Marjorie's voice crackled through the speaker. What's going on? He didn't answer. He stood, smoothing his jacket, forcing a breath into his chest, and opened the door. 2 men stood in the hallway. Dark suits, badges already visible. Calm eyes that had seen panic before and learned not to react to it. Howard Leland, the taller one, said, We need to ask you a few questions. Howard's throat tightened. About what? Fraud, the man replied. And obstruction. Howard glanced down the hallway as if the building itself might save him. I have counsel. You're welcome to call them, the agent said. But you're coming with us. By noon, the footage was everywhere. Howard Leland, regional director, stepping into an unmarked car, jaw, clenched eyes, hollow. No handcuffs. Not yet. That came later. At the building, the news spread through whispers and phone screens. Tenants gathered in the lobby, not cheering, not celebrating, just watching, absorbing the shift. Samuel Carter stood near the mailboxes, reading the alert twice to make sure it was real. Mrs. Delaney, back from her hotel room for the day, touched his arm. "Is it true?" Samuel nodded slowly. "Looks like it." She exhaled. "I never thought I'd see it." "Neither did I," Samuel said. Across town, David Brooks sat in his office, watching the same footage on mute. His phone buzzed once, then again. Messages stacking up. Regulators, journalists, allies who'd stayed quiet until now. He ignored most of them. One message he opened immediately. "State AG wants a meeting. Today." David replied with a single word. "Yes." The office of the Attorney General was colder than it needed to be. Glass, stone, flags placed with care. David sat across from a woman in her late 50s with steel grey hair and a reputation for patience that unnerved people. "We've been watching Midwest for a long time," she said, fingers laced. "We just needed a clean entry point." David nodded. "You have one now." She studied him. "You didn't have to do this the way you did." "I know," David said. "Why did you?" David didn't answer immediately. He thought of Samuel's ring, of the inspection photos, of the language in those emails. Accelerate natural turnover. "Because people shouldn't have to be loud to matter," he said. The Attorney General leaned back. "They will fight." "They already are," David replied. She slid a folder across the table. "Then we'll do this properly." Back at the building, a notice appeared on the front door. City letterhead. Official. Heavy paper. Temporary administrator appointed. Tenancies protected during review. Samuel read it out loud for those who couldn't see well anymore. The words sounded strange, solid, protective. A cheer rose hesitant at first, then stronger. Someone clapped. Someone cried. Samuel stepped back, overwhelmed as people hugged and laughed and shook their heads in disbelief. Later that afternoon, David walked into the building for the first time without a coat or a plan. Just a presence. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. Samuel spotted him near the stairwell. They met halfway. "You didn't have to come," Samuel said. David looked around. "I wanted to see it." They stood together in the lobby, watching life resume. Kids running. Someone arguing about a lost package. Normal things. "They're charging him," Samuel said quietly. "Yes," David replied. "And the others." "Yes," Samuel nodded. "Feels strange." David glanced at him. Relief often does. A man approached them, middle-aged, nervous. "Mr. Brooks," he said. "I just wanted to say thank you." David shook his head. "Take care of each other," he said. "That's enough." The man nodded, eyes wet, and walked away. That evening, the backlash arrived. An op-ed accused David of manipulating markets. A commentator called it corporate vigilantism. Anonymous sources questioned his motives. David read it all without expression. His phone rang. An unknown number. He answered. "You've made powerful enemies," a voice said. Older, measured, smiling without warmth. David leaned back in his chair. "So I'm told. You think today was a victory?" "I think it was necessary," David replied. A soft chuckle. "Necessity is a dangerous justification." David's voice hardened. "So is neglect." The line went quiet. "You don't know how far this goes," the voice said finally. David thought of the trust documents. the default clauses, the servers already imaged. I know enough. The call ended. Outside, night settled over the city. Lights burned in windows that had been dark for weeks. The building felt alive again, humming with something close to hope. Samuel sat at his kitchen table, the same one holding a cup of tea gone cold. He listened to the sounds through the wall. Laughter. Music. A radio tuned to the oldies station his wife used to love. He looked at his phone. A message from David. Tomorrow will be noisy. Don't let it rush you. Samuel typed back. I won't. David stood at his window city, stretching out below him like a living thing. He knew this wasn't the end. There would be appeals, lawsuits, attempts to rewrite the narrative. But the foundation had cracked, and cracks once exposed had a way of spreading. He turned off the lights and let the darkness settle steady and unafraid. Somewhere beneath the noise of outrage and analysis, something quieter was happening. People were watching, learning, and the next time someone tried to erase a life with paperwork and silence, it wouldn't be so easy. The retaliation came disguised as procedure. It started with filings, appeals stacked on appeals motions wrapped in polite language that spoke of fairness while aiming to exhaust. Midwest's remaining executives didn't argue innocence anymore. They argued complexity, jurisdiction, timing, anything to slow the bleed. David Brooks watched it unfold from a distance, not detached, but deliberate. He read every line. He traced every shell. He let them spend money trying to outrun facts that were already sealed and time-stamped. At the building, life didn't return to normal so much as it learned how to breathe again. Repairs began in earnest. Real contractors this time. Permits posted. Radiators replaced instead of patched. The smell of fresh paint mixed with old dust and something else that hadn't been there in years. Relief. Samuel Carter walked the halls each morning, nodding to neighbors who had learned to look up again. Mrs. Delaney came back with her suitcase and cried in the doorway, like the walls had forgiven her for leaving. A young couple on the second floor hung new curtains, small acts, defiant ones. But not everyone was celebrating. A black SUV parked across the street one afternoon and stayed too long. Samuel noticed. He always noticed now. When it finally pulled away, his phone buzzed. David. They're probing the message read. Nothing illegal. Just pressure. Samuel typed back. I figured. Another pause. Then I'm sorry. Samuel stared at the screen. He hadn't expected that. He typed slowly. You didn't start this. David didn't reply right away. Across the city, in a building with tighter security and quieter hallways, a different meeting was happening. No press, no minutes taken. Just men and women who had outlasted administrations and knew how to wait. They turned a housing dispute into a spectacle, one of them said. They turned neglect into evidence, another replied. A third voice cut in. This Brooks thinks he's insulated. A chuckle. Everyone thinks that. Folders slid across polished wood. Names, entities, leverage points that didn't show up in public records. Find his exposure, the chair said. Not financial, personal. Back at the building, Samuel received a letter with no return address. Typed, no threats, just implication. Questions about permits he'd pulled decades ago, about side jobs he'd taken for cash when his wife was sick, about whether he wanted all of that examined. He read it once, then folded it and placed it in the drawer with the others. That evening, David came by unannounced. Samuel opened the door and stepped aside without a word. They sat at the table, the same light overhead. David read the letter slowly, jaw tightening just a notch. "They're trying to scare you," David said. Samuel shrugged. "They're late." David looked at him. "This will get uglier before it ends." Samuel met his eyes. "I know." Silence settled between them. Not awkward. Familiar. "They're coming for you too," Samuel said finally. David nodded. "They already have." A beat. "Why keep going?" Samuel asked. "You've done enough." David leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. "Because stopping halfway teaches the wrong lesson." Outside, a siren wailed, then faded. The next morning, the lesson began. A sealed indictment was unsealed at 10. Not just Howard Leland. 2 board members, a consultant, charges expanded, wire fraud, conspiracy, retaliation against protected tenants. Markets reacted, quietly, then sharply. Midwest Property Holdings issued a statement blaming rogue actors. It fooled no one. At noon, the Attorney General stood at a podium and spoke about accountability in plain language. No grandstanding, no names spared. At 1, a civil suit was filed on behalf of the tenants. Class action, damages, injunctions. By 3, the op-eds shifted tone. David watched from his office, the city stretched beneath him like a map of consequences. His phone rang. "Unknown number." He answered. "You've made your point," the voice said. "The same one. Older. Controlled." "I've made several," David replied. "You're costing people money." "I'm returning it," David said. A pause. "You could stop." David considered the offer he knew was coming. The implied trade. Silence for relief. "No," he said. Another pause. "Longer this time." "Then understand this," the voice said. "You won't be forgiven." David's voice was steady. "I'm not asking to be." The line went dead. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. Not from fear, from the unfamiliar weight of possibility. He stood by the window, watching the building across the street go dark floor by floor. He thought of his wife, of what she would have said. Probably something practical, something kind. His phone buzzed. "David, tomorrow will be decisive. Samuel." "I'll be there." The next day, the hearing room was smaller. Fewer cameras, more intent. Midwest's remaining counsel argued settlement. Quietly, urgently. David listened, then stood. "No," he said. The word carried. The judge looked up. "Mr. Brooks, this isn't about money," David said. "It's about acknowledgement and change." The judge nodded slowly. "Then we proceed." Outside reporters asked questions David didn't answer. Samuel stood beside him not as a symbol now, but as a man who had chosen not to move. As they walked down the steps, Samuel spoke. "Whatever happens next." David finished the thought. "We don't disappear." They shook hands, firm, equal. Across the street, the black SUV was gone. In its place, sunlight fell cleanly on the courthouse steps. And for the first time since the gavel had fallen weeks ago, the future didn't feel like something to brace against. It felt like something to meet. The ruling came down on a quiet Friday afternoon, the kind of hour when markets thin out and offices start to empty, as if the system itself preferred to deliver consequences when fewer people were watching. The settlement was not dramatic. No shouting, no last-minute appeals, just signatures, stamped pages, and a judge who read the terms carefully before looking up and saying, "So ordered." Midwest Property Holdings would dissolve its regional entity, assets placed under oversight, buildings transferred to a public trust with binding requirements, independent management, permanent tenant protections, no rebranding, no shell games, no quiet return under a different name. Howard Leland was not in the room. Neither were the board members, who had vanished into negotiated silence. Their absence spoke louder than any apology ever could. Outside, David Brooks stood on the courthouse steps and felt the weight finally lift. Not relief. Something cleaner. Completion. The city moved around him, unaware that a small corner of it had just changed shape. Samuel Carter arrived late, breathless, jacket unbuttoned. He stopped when he saw David and simply nodded. They did not hug. They did not smile when... Men their age knew better. They stood side by side and watched people pass. "It's done," Samuel said. "Yes," David replied. "It's done right." They walked together toward the street. No cameras this time, no microphones, just the sound of traffic and footsteps. At the building, the changes were already visible. New signage in the lobby. A notice board filled with dates and names. A maintenance schedule posted in plain language, not legal fog. The smell of fresh paint lingered, but it no longer felt like a cover. It felt like care. Samuel unlocked his door and stepped inside. The apartment felt the same. The table, the chair, the photograph of his wife by the window. But the air had changed. Less brittle. More forgiving. He sat and placed his keys on the table, listening. Pipes hummed softly, steady. No knocking, no warning rattle. He touched the ring once, not to reassure himself this time, but to remember. That evening, a gathering formed in the lobby without planning. Folding chairs appeared. Someone brought a tray of cookies. Someone else a radio tuned low. Neighbors talked awkward at first, then easier. Names shared that had gone unspoken for years. Angela Park arrived quietly and stood in the back, watching. When Samuel caught her eye, she nodded once. No speeches, no credit taken, just acknowledgement. David came later, standing near the doorway. People noticed him, but didn't crowd. He belonged there now in a way he hadn't before. Not as a rescuer, as a witness. A man approached him younger than most, holding a folded piece of paper. I just wanted to say, he began, then stopped searching for words. David waited. The man nodded to himself and continued. "We're staying." David smiled faintly. That matters. The weeks that followed were quieter. The kind of quiet that settles after a storm, when damage has been counted and work begins. Regulators filed reports. Non-profits stepped in. The trust-appointed managers who knew boilers and budgets equally well. The story moved on in the news cycle, replaced by newer outrage, fresher noise. But the building stayed. Samuel resumed his routines. Morning coffee, a walk around the block, checking in on Mrs. Delaney, who now kept her suitcase in the closet where it belonged. He volunteered to help the tenant council, not because he wanted the role, but because someone had to remember what it was like before. David returned to his office and his work. He turned down interviews, declined panels. He focused instead on quiet replication, on identifying patterns that looked harmless until they weren't, on preparing for the next time procedure tried to masquerade as inevitability. One evening, months later, David stopped by the building again. Samuel met him at the door, surprised but pleased. "I won't stay," David said. "I was in the neighborhood." Samuel poured 2 cups anyway. They sat at the table, the same table that had anchored everything. "You changed things," Samuel said. David shook his head. "We did." Samuel nodded. "They won't forget this." "No," David agreed. "But neither will you." They sat in silence, comfortable now. Outside, the city breathed. Somewhere a bus hissed to a stop. Somewhere else, someone locked a door and felt safe doing it. When David stood to leave, Samuel walked him to the door. "You know," Samuel said almost casually, "my wife used to say, the hardest part of standing your ground was realizing how many people were hoping you wouldn't." David paused, then smiled. "She sounds like someone worth listening to." "She was," Samuel said. After the door closed, Samuel returned to the table and sat for a long moment, hands folded, eyes steady. He wasn't waiting for anything anymore. He was simply there. Across the city, lights flicked on as evening settled in. In offices and apartments and buildings that rarely made headlines, people lived inside the quiet aftermath of a line held and not crossed. Stories like this don't end with cheers. They end with rooms that stay occupied, with doors that remain unlocked by force, with people who learn that dignity is not granted by paperwork and can't be revoked by neglect. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with the words, "Stand your ground."